I'm your host, Matt McLeod, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Alex Cartmill.
Excellent. And today we are joined by Kate Solovyova. Kate, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing excellent. And I'm very excited for the podcast that we're about to get into. As we just talked about before this, we were getting into things and figuring out the main topic. So, Alex, first off, do you want to go ahead with the topic for the day and what we're going to discuss in this episode with Kate?
Absolutely. Kate, first and foremost, really happy to have you on. I know we've crossed paths over the years in our coaching world, and you're always someone that I have looked up to and respected their mind. So thank you so much, first and foremost, for agreeing to be on the show. Really happy to have you. The topic, and we'll get into a little bit more around your experience with this, is interpersonal strength. So we're in our strength mini series right now. And especially from COVID and the quarantine, how we interact with others seemed increasingly important in our world. And so when we think about interpersonal strength, at least when I think about it, and Matt, I'd be curious to hear how you think about it just in your own world. I think about the strength that we have to interact with others, and to leave an interaction, leaving somebody else feeling like that interaction was positive and sending them off on their way, with a positive ripple. And I feel like for a lot of us, one, just communication skills and interpersonal relationships and dealing with other people, all the way from the passerby on the street, the person you share 4 words with, to someone you talk to every single day. It seems like there's a lot of challenges and difficulties around how do we navigate these types of relationships in a way that's mutually beneficial. And it's certainly something in my life over the last 2 years now during COVID, and possibly other people have felt this. As I've gotten back out into the world, I've felt, oh my gosh, it feels weird to engage with people now. And like, I don't have necessarily, some of those principles have kind of eroded over the last couple of years, for me. And so I also just feel I'm very human centered. And so how we interact with others has such a ripple effect on how they're going to interact with the next person, and et cetera, et cetera. So I just think, having principles and, guiding kind of pieces to, fuel those relationships, are really important to me.
Yeah.
But Matt, I'm curious how you kind of interact with that term.
Yeah, 100%. Mine's definitely not going to be as eloquent as that because, Kate, I'm very much here to be a student with everything that you're about to inform us. So I'm probably more aligned with some of the listeners here, because for me, every time that I think about this stuff, it's very ingrained in me from childhood. My parents are they're the most emotionally intelligent people. I have the best mom in the world, communicating with people, connecting with people, all of these different relationships, very much comes from the nature side of me. Like it just happens very naturally, for me. And so that's kind of how I see these things. And it's like, how do you tell people about being a great athlete or something like that? Like how do you do that? So my explanation is limited. And so that's why I'm excited to hear you rip apart both of our answers and kind of fill us in with your more, expert opinion on that. So yeah, what do you think?
No, I love that. I think part of the beginning of almost every conversation is making sure that we actually share the terms, right? Like it's the definition of the shared language. We have to be able to share the language in order to communicate. So even making sure that we are in fact talking about the same thing is often important. And this comes in coaching conversations all the time, right? Like I want to feel better. I want to feel healthier. And if we jump into that conversation without necessarily getting on the same page, we could be just running off in 2 completely different directions, because what health means to one person is not the same thing what it means to another person, which is why I rigged the scenario here a little bit. And I asked you to start us off with what you think this topic means to you before we go down this rabbit hole together. So really the way that I heard Alex talk about it is we really talk about interpersonal communication and all the skills within that bucket. And when we talk about interpersonal strength, we talk about how strong is that interpersonal communication muscle? And what has happened to that muscle over the last few years, especially? For some people, it has atrophied. For some people, they have been able to, maintain strength, so to speak. They have continued their interpersonal communication training regime one way or another, and maybe they were able to stay in that same spot. And maybe others have improved. Alex, what do you think? Am I encapsulating what you had in mind here?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious to hear, Kate, what has that muscle done for you the last 3 years?
Mhm. Yeah. I think the last couple of years they've been very challenging, but I think I've made a couple of realizations when it comes to how my life has versus has not changed. And those realizations made me, on one hand, really lucky and really, really privileged. And on the other hand, really sad because my life hasn't changed that much. I've been working from home for the last 7 or 8 years. So I was able to continue doing that. I was able to continue those same meetings with the same people and seeing clients one-on-one and in group settings. So from that perspective, I was able to maintain my regular cadence of client work, communication, meetings. The face-to-face communication, I've also noticed that hasn't been altered very much. And I think that's the piece that made me a little sad because it's like, well, apparently I don't really get out very much, do I? Where I was still able to see my immediate family members and obviously my spouse and my children and some of my closest friends. There were periods of time there that we all remember when the lockdowns and restrictions got dialed up, dialed down. I'm in Ontario, Canada, so we were under some of the stricter restrictions, I would say. But the big piece that has really changed for me, it's communication as connected to events, travel, and sport. So it's really been that piece that I found has really changed because all of a sudden everything was canceled. Races were canceled, conferences were canceled, events were canceled. Every single thing has gone onto Zoom. And that's again like maybe the piece where I found myself better equipped the most because I didn't have to overnight learn how to work remotely. And I know Alex can probably relate to that as well, right? Like we just sort of continued work from Monday to Tuesday, where some folks had to figure out overnight how to do all the things they were doing in person, all of a sudden do that online. And I can't imagine the impact that would have had because you would have had to take all the input that you're used to having. Like I'm thinking of, let's say, being a therapist or a psychologist who would see clients face to face at an office. And then all of a sudden you would have to deliver that in a little screen. I've never met most of my clients. So all feedback and all the input that I've had was the same input and the feedback that I always had all throughout the pandemic. So I think like for me, communication skills, communication muscle hasn't been altered as much, but I'm also a raging extrovert. So there are other aspects that have been really challenging, like the fact that we could not gather in groups and crowds. I found very difficult. I found the notion of masking very difficult, just like psychologically. I'm the person who hugs strangers. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, you would
Yes,
fit
we
in
had a
very
group hug.
you would fit in very well around here in Kentucky. That's where I'm from, down the south. Hugs
There
are
you go.
mandatory for sure. That's great. Well, so and I'm also a pretty big extrovert. I usually just say I'm a vert because I definitely have introverted tendencies and extroverted tendencies, but I get very energized in big crowds and I very much am okay with being the center of attention. Probably hence why we're also doing a podcast like this. But so what I'm wondering is like, what did you do personally to kind of maybe cultivate even a like fake environment like this? Did you have scheduled meetings with friends like on Zoom, or maybe what are some techniques and things that you found successful for yourself, or also for maybe some of the clients that you worked with too?
I think that it was a combination of intentional making of the plans and some trying to function within the restrictions, if that makes sense, right? Like, so again, I found that risk tolerance has come front and center in the last couple of years because people's risk tolerance is different. And for some folks, that really meant hunkering down in their house for weeks or months and having their groceries delivered, right? And cutting themselves off from their immediate family apart from maybe Zoom meetings. That was never going to be like an option for me. I always saw my parents, whether or not that was a good idea or not, right? But I continued to see my mom. I continued to see my dad. We sort of talked about the risks and what that meant. And I think I've also noticed a lot. I started having a lot of coaching conversations around that, where we talked about managing risk. We talked about weighing the pros and cons, where I might have a client who would see a chiropractor once a week for debilitating back pain. And all of a sudden, they hunker down at home because they didn't feel safe going out, even for that one weekly appointment to see their chiropractor. And then we talked about trade-offs. We talked about, would it be worthwhile, maybe, to increase the risk by a tiny bit for a trade-off of maybe managing their pain better, right? Like, what is it worth? Like, what is it worth to you? Because maybe having a little bit less pain would be worth that small additional risk. Folks who had no choice but work outside of their home would obviously have more risk, and they might need to dial down elsewhere, right? Like we talked about, like spoons, right? Like how many spoons you have of risk taking. While if you work from home, then you actually have maybe a little bit more spoons to spend. If you already go out of the home, you might minimize your risk elsewhere.
Sure.
I love that actually. Did you have any, like, what were the next steps after mitigating risk? Was there like, so of course you have to have that conversation, and that's going to fall along a spectrum of what people are willing to accept or not accept. But what were the action steps after that? Like, was there anything that, I'm just trying to think of what the process looked like after you guys had that risk mitigation discussion, and potentially what people felt that they wanted to do, but then, what they wanted to do compared to what they actually did, if that makes sense.
Well, I think this would be a conversation in some respects no different than any other conversation about trade-offs, right? It's like, hey, I want a six-pack. You want a six-pack? Cool. Let's talk about what that would take. Do you still want a six-pack? Yes, I do. Or no, not really. And you kind of land in a different place depending on your willingness to trade off, right? So I think the same thing, like where some folks would actually choose to go ahead and see their chiropractor, but maybe once a month, not weekly. Or maybe they say, no, I'm still not comfortable, right? And we've seen that where some people stopped going to the gym completely and entirely, where I said, I will go to the gym as long as it's open. I will wear a mask. I will hop through hoops, right? Like I will stand on my head. I will do whatever I need to do and whatever the rules are. But as long as it's open and I'm legally allowed to be there, I'll go. Because to me, that is my trade-off. And then the gym closed multiple times over the course of 2.5 years, right? Which also kind of regulated and dictated my behavior at the time too.
Yeah, it's a matter of looking at something from the bigger picture and trying to remove maybe some biases or emotion around, is this genuine fear that I have? And obviously we're getting slightly off track here, as we do, but is this fear that I have, how much is it rooted in, my emotions and how much is rooted in factuality. And I think you almost have to put that lens on when you're trying to weigh the pros and cons, because it's hard to allow those emotions to rise through. Now, of course, for each individual, if the fear is so high, then the risk is high. Whether that's factually based or not, it can be challenging to unwind that. Um, there's something I built called the freedom spectrum in the fitness world, which is exactly what you're describing. It's, you want to have this body and you want to have a six pack. Here's what you need to do to get that. Is that worth it for you? The reality is you're going to have less life freedom if you want this. Is that worth it to you? Or do you not want a six pack? Great. You can drink your beer. You can be more flexible from a life perspective, but don't expect the results to be the same as if you were really rigid from a life perspective.
Well, and no,
Really powerful stuff.
to kind of bring it back to interpersonal communication, I think we have noticed a couple of really interesting trends, right? Like the one thing I've noticed is a lot of people coming back to social media, which was fascinating because there was this people leaving Facebook and other platforms in hordes, and all of a sudden you couldn't go anywhere, nothing was happening, and everyone was at home. Well, people being people
Totally.
were feeling lonely, and you went back onto various social media platforms to just stay in some sort of touch with people. But that came with its own downsides, where now all of a sudden all of our communication is happening on this platform, which is not exactly made for deep, meaningful conversation like the one we're having here, and a lot is lost in translation, in emojis, in text, in just no intonations, like not having an actual person in front of you to talk to. And I think we've seen that too. We've seen quite a lot of like polarization between groups. We've seen people just kind of generally getting angry and shut down, and now leaving social media platforms yet again, and we've come full circle.
Yeah,
How do you,
right. It's a
how
it's a cycle that we may never escape. Let's go ahead, Matt.
how do you manage that, Kate? I'm really curious how you manage your own mental health around social media, and because I feel like this plays into interpersonal strength, or just with the effects, of course, with COVID, everything that's happened. I know that social media can exacerbate issues with people and all these different things. So first, I guess, yeah, you personally, if you're comfortable sharing, of course, like how do you kind of manage that yin and yang with the great things about social media, but then also the negative sides that can come with it?
Yeah, I think also perhaps again a bit of a leg up on here because my work has lived on social media before COVID. So I had to figure out a lot of how to navigate the wild, wild west of the internet before that. And I sort of I think of social media platforms as organisms and entities of their own, because this is where often individuals, they just sort of gel together into this angry bear sometimes, right? And it's no longer individuals, it's just this big angry bear that is hungry or is happy or is sleeping. So I think about it that way sometimes. And just for my own personal sanity, I do two things. So on Facebook, I have no news feed. I use Newsfeed Eradicator plugin, so I just don't see Newsfeed at all. It's blank. And on Instagram, I follow 25 people, and I know them all in real life. And once in a while, I get curious about a topic, and then that number creeps up because I find, ooh, this person and this person, and 5 and 6, and now I'm like in mid 30s, and then I have to dial it back a couple of weeks or a couple of months later. It's like, who do I unfollow? But I keep that number extremely, extremely small, which makes my Instagram feed incredibly, well, I don't want to say boring because I like all those people, but it is quite unstimulating because there is very few posts in any one day. So me scrolling through it, I can't really do that 12, 25 times a day because I get caught up on my feed very, very quickly. And then there's nothing new for me there.
Sure.
Right.
What drives you to feel like you have to whittle back the number? Is it this psychological, oh, I'm at 38, that's more than I want to be? Or is something triggered by, I see this doesn't resonate with me in the way that I thought it did a month ago, or I used to be in this place where I liked this, not like this person, but they passed the threshold of making it into my feed, and now that's not the case. Is it more of that, or is it more of just, oh, I
This is
can't have more than 40?
This is fun because the rabbit hole we're going down, I dig a lot, because, and I think it actually fits beautifully within idea of interpersonal communication. I feel like the rabbit hole we're going down is into emotional self-regulation. Like, how do you adjust your own environment to help yourself be okay as it relates to communicating with other people, right? And that is
Mm-hmm.
very much a thing on various levels. So, like, from one example, very early on in the pandemic, lockdowns, all the things, I remember writing an essay about, it was titled, I'm an extrovert and I'm not okay. Because the big piece was actually not the communication, it was the physical closeness that was
Mm.
not okay all of a sudden. It was the touch, it was the hugging of the strangers, it was the gathering in the groups. And that was the piece that I really missed acutely almost right away. Um, and then there was this undercurrent still early on from the more introverted folks who said, really, I love this. This is great. I'm really enjoying this. I finally don't have, like, I don't feel the pressure to go to birthday parties, right? Like, to go to these
Mm-hmm.
events that made me feel quite uncomfortable. And that was an interesting trend because what happened over time is, and I'm making generalizations here, of course, but introverts caught up because they felt the shortage in different places and in different ways. And it just took a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
time to feel that. Extroverts felt it right away. For introverts, it was like,
Mm.
well, I got plenty of social interaction before because I would go to the office, I would talk to a coworker, I would pop into a coffee shop, I would talk with a barista, I would give him a compliment, I would get my coffee, and that would fill their cup. That would fill their interaction cup, which just didn't need as much interaction as my cup would. My cup is more of a
Mm.
bucket, right? But they started feeling that too because we lost all of those little social interactions. Like, you never on Zoom with your barista. Like, that's just not a thing, right? So we
Right.
lost so many of those like little social interactions where groceries are delivered. Oh, okay, so you're no longer talking to the cashier. You're no longer exchanging a glance at a smile with like another mom with a shopping cart in an aisle. Like, you just lost that because the boxes are right there outside the door and I didn't even see the delivery
Mm-hmm.
person. They came, they knocked, and they ran away. Like, it was the nobody opened doors anymore. So what did we do from that perspective to self-regulate our okayness? That's where one of you was asking, like, what did I do? I would make dates with my friends. We would meet up in town. We would go through
Mm.
drive-through in two separate vehicles. Like, I would drive my car and then they would drive their car. And then we would park 10 feet away from each other and roll the windows down. And we would, like, this is how we would go out for coffee.
That's
Right. So
crazy, but I
Mm.
love it. That's crazy, but I
that
love it.
was right. Like, this was sort of like the way to make it okay. And someone listening to this, will, on some folks are thinking like, whoa, too risky. Others are thinking, oh my God, that's insane. Like, that sounds wild. Right. And kind of where you're reacting probably depends a lot on where you're based, what the restrictions were like where you lived, and also just your own comfort level, right? Like, back to the risk tolerance. So some of the introverted
Yes.
folks, they've noticed that they needed to intentionally add some of those social interactions back in their life in order to be okay. However that looked, whether all of a sudden people started going for a walk with their neighbors, or maybe strike
Mm-hmm.
up a conversation in a park to try and fill that cup or a bucket. And then the full circle brings us back to social media and the original question. This is my long detour of how do we self-regulate when it comes to other people on social media, right? Like, what does that look like? And Alex was asking, like, so how do you know to dial it back
Mm-hmm.
down, to remove it? And I think a lot of it is trial and error in many ways. Like, I am part of many conversations around coaching and getting clients and working with clients. And I would often see coaches express frustration at seeing stuff, like seeing stuff on the internet. Like, aren't you guys so angry and so pissed off with
Mm.
all of these so-called coaches that have a weekend certification and they're calling themselves and they're posting this and they're posting that? Like, aren't you angry? And I would think to myself, no, I'm not, because I don't have that. I don't
Mm.
see it. I don't see those coaches. I don't have those coaches on my feed. And if I did, I would very, very quickly delete, exit, unfriend, unfollow, close, unload, right? Like, delete the
Right.
app, because that's part of my emotional self-regulation. I don't see an upside. I
Why
don't
do
see
people
an
do that?
Mm.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but
Ooh,
like why
no.
do people do that? Like why do they feed into that negativity so much?
Do you guys do that?
Yes, I do. And it's
Okay.
it's a
So
flaw.
Alex, you're the best person to tell us then. Why do you
Yeah.
do it? Because
It's such a great question, and it's honestly something I think about in myself, and I'm intentionally trying not to do it because, like you, Kate, I mean, it has an impact on me. When I read the comments on an article that I know are gonna anger me, I do it anyway, and it's a conscious. I'm not consciously sitting there thinking I'm gonna be angry by this. Pause. Okay, I accept that. I'm gonna do it. That's not something I think about. I just do it. It's in There's an immediate curiosity for me as to what the conversation is. I'm very interested by what exists in the world, regardless of what it is. And in fact, if it's a little cringy or if it's a little out there or scammy, or whatever it may be, from a curiosity perspective, it's actually stronger for me to want to immerse myself and see what that is. My personality is very much like, if it rubs me the wrong way or I immediately don't agree with it, I want to learn more about it. The downside that comes with that, of course, is I will be on my couch for 15 minutes being upset by reading this comment fight or by looking at this post or by doing something because I think, why are people like this? I wish they weren't. And I have to hold back from leaving a comment and all these different things. But for me, it's so far. I like to think it's far off from how I personally think and see the world, and so I like to try to understand those perspectives. That's where my desire comes from, but it comes with the irritation and anger that's only rooted in myself. They don't know that I'm angry. I'm not talking to them. There's no change is happening. The only thing that's happening is me being annoyed. Sure, maybe I feel like I can learn a little bit better. Maybe I can try to understand where they're coming from a little bit more, or why someone chooses to take this path, and that is helpful for me. But it comes with a downside that isn't worth it. But that's really my driver to want to, and I'm sure there's a FOMO piece of that too. If I'm not
yeah.
looking at anything, what am I missing that's out there? I think that's probably ingrained in me as well.
Well, the FOMO piece is a big one because this is often the one that folks I work with cite as a main reason, right? Like, I follow
Yeah,
person X, Y, and Z to see what they create for ideas and inspiration, which is a great cover
sure.
story. It never works like that because all it ends up
No.
doing is just making you feel bad, right? Like, you tell
Yes.
yourself that you follow this person for inspiration, when in truth, what happens, you see what they put out and you start going through the narrative of like, oh wow, this is really good. Oh, how did they come up with that? Oh, I wish I came up with it. How can they come up with all these good things and I
Mm-hmm.
can never come up with good things? I suck. And then it just kind of goes down yet another rabbit hole, right? Which, to me, I don't find that helpful to me at all. It doesn't propel me forward. It doesn't motivate me.
Sure.
It does the exact opposite. It just demotivates me. It makes me feel like I suck. And I have enough of that. Like I feel like I feel like I suck enough. Like I don't need to add to that artificially, right? I don't need to.
It's not a helpful,
So
yeah.
that was one of my, and so when coaches ask, I say, I actually don't follow any coaches, right? Like some amazing, brilliant coaches that are out there putting out some awesome, awesome stuff. I don't, because that's what following them does. And it probably speaks to my own insecurity. And I get that. But I think there is something there. And I know, Alex, you're really passionate about sort of like the introspectiveness and self-awareness. I'm self-aware enough to know that, right? It's like, I know that the cover story I tell myself about how this is inspirational is bullshit. And I just land in a place of comparison and feeling inadequate. Should I be feeling that way? No, probably not. But then we're in should land, and who cares, right? Like, who cares what it should be? I care about what is, and it's just not helpful. So I think it's the question of, is it helpful? No. Okay, then. But I'm also incredibly passionate about that one piece that you talked about, because it really sounds to me that what really drives you is that curiosity, because you want to expose yourself to diverse perspectives. And I am incredibly passionate about that. I think my only caveat, and maybe the difference there, is that I am very paranoid about the quality of those perspectives. So I'm not particularly interested in diverse perspectives for the sake of diverse perspectives. And goodness knows there is a lot of that on Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. But I'm not particularly interested in, a random dude from Kentucky. Hi, Matt. Right. To kind of like what they think about topic X or topic Y. So this is where, as an atheist, I'm going to seek out the Bible, and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to read it. And that is my exposure to a diverse perspective. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So fascinating, Kate. It makes sense. And it's so funny because this is highlighting a really interesting difference between us, I think, is I'm an agnostic. I would say I'm an atheist if I wasn't so like, well, it's possible, and that's usually my perspective about all these things. And it leads me into, because a counterpoint that I would make to you, hesitantly because I'm scared, is is there such thing as quality of a perspective? If it's from one individual person, does quality even exist in that sphere? For instance, I think now, if we're talking about trying to learn something from somebody, there's quality to that. I wouldn't trust a random dude from Kentucky, Matt,
all right, guys.
Opinion on
Joke's
anything,
over.
really.
No. Okay.
You're in the middle, right? Like you're between me and Alex. I think we've just sort of placed ourselves this way, and we're just gonna.
Yeah, right. Which is exactly how our video's set up. But what I was going to say was, the reason I'm so interested in reading the Facebook interaction is because, do these people know a lot about what they're talking about? Is it rooted in fact? Probably not. So then I ask my question, what is it rooted in, and what drives them to share it? What drives them to get to this point? And personally, I think there's value, there's quality in understanding that perspective, even if the objective information that they're sharing is off. Because I'm a skeptic by nature. I don't go into the comments and being like, I'm gonna try to, educate myself on this thing. I usually don't. I'm very specific on who I choose to learn from. But I think from a psychology, human interaction, just human behavior perspective, I get a lot of good information from any perspective that's out there, and just trying to learn what was the path that this person took, or what drove this person to share this perspective, and to see the world through this lens. So when I think about seeing other perspectives from that point of view, every perspective is the same in my eyes, almost, because that story can be told for any opinion. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm actually curious what Matt thinks. because he's thinking pretty hard right now. Where are you at, Matt? Are you
He's
like
pondering.
strictly in between myself and Alex on this?
Yeah,
Pick a side, damn it.
I know, right? It's definitely for me because I 100% understand, um, Kate, where you're coming from as far as kind of like, okay, let's go to the source. It's like I have a friend who he doesn't love like Ryan Holiday and like the Daily Stoic and like all these different kind of middleman books, as opposed to why not just go to the actual philosophy, right? Like why not get to the source as opposed to the interpretation of a middleman who may not be potentially qualified to talk about certain things. However, I've gotten tons of value from Ryan Holiday and the Daily Stoic and some of these other books. So I constantly go back and forth in my head about these things, especially if I'm not one to, I'm not going to turn to I'm not going to turn to the Bible. I'm not going to turn to these philosophical books because I'm going to go probably to the person who, based off of all these other little filters that I've ran, based off of people that I look up to or that I believe in, or I let them do the heavy lifting. And of course, I understand that this can be a slippery slope and, group thing or whatever it is, right? These can have its pros and cons, but it's like, for example, with me being a fitness coach, it's like I am not knee deep into the research every single day or anything like that, right? But I follow a certain circle of people who are the researchers or are very deep into the research, and I trust them to be my filter from the source to learn about these certain things. Now, as far as we're talking about just random comments of people on things, it's like, yeah, I think what ends up happening is I will click on someone's on Twitter example. Somebody that I respect tweets something that I really agree with, and then I will look at the first comment, and if it's something that is counter to what they're saying, it's like, and it has tons of retweets and likes and all these different things. Then I'm like, oh, okay. Of course, there's some internal shaking going on with whatever identity I have rooted within this thing, or however I see myself within this belief. But then I can't help but then find myself, like Alex said, 15 minutes later, I'm down this rabbit hole of this, these commenters on Twitter who isn't actually getting me probably any closer to what I'm searching for in the first place anyway. However, it does spark the idea that, oh, I could be wrong. And I think that could be the catalyst to finding or in the search of truth, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's
I I went to a mummy boot camp a couple of weeks ago. I swear I have a point. Let's hope we get there. And it was interesting. I came after an hour of this boot camp, and my partner asked, he said, so what did you think? How was it? And I said, I loved the people. It was a full class of moms, right, in a small town where I am. The instructor was like super cheery and super encouraging, and a couple of people there were my friends. Like, I enjoyed the time, but it was a fitness class. And he said, so how was it? I said, it's a good place to get sore. It's not a good place to get fit. And that's kind of how I feel sometimes, Matt, like to what you were talking, right? Like when we're going down, like, oh, these Twitter, like it's sort of interesting, it's sort of fascinating, it's kind of diverse, but you were saying, like, I'm not entirely sure if it's actually getting me any further. Like, it's a way to get sore. It's not a way to get fit. And if we're just there to get sore, that's cool.
Yeah.
But I'm all about, like, again, I'm all about self-awareness. Like, if I'm going there, I could commit to this class and go every week to go spend some time with fellow moms, just, listen to some Britney Spears, lift some super light dumbbells over my head, and not expect much in terms of body recomposition, in terms of gains, in terms of strength. As long as that's what I expect, it's a great hour. It's a social hour. I might get a little sore. Cool. Then that's a great way to spend an hour. But if I'm going to start going to that class every Monday or 4 times a week and hope to, I don't know, deadlift double my body weight, I will be incredibly disappointed. So I think because that's just not the right transport for the job. That's not the right vehicle of how to get there. So I think, like, when we catch ourselves scrolling and getting sucked into conversations or just like observing and lurking.
Mhm.
Um, is that a self-aware, intentional behavior?
Mm.
Um, because sometimes I'm on a couch and I just want to like stupid scroll. That's what I want to do. I just want
Right.
to stupid scroll. I just want everybody to leave me alone and like not touch me and just like I just want to stupid scroll. But if I'm out there and I want to learn more, right, like so I was looking up some terms before our conversation today, right? And I kind of started like looking up some of the research, like I was looking into resilience and mental toughness. I didn't go to a Facebook group on mental toughness, and I'm sure there is a Facebook group out there on mental toughness. I went to PubMed and I pulled up some research reviews because that would get me closer to refreshing my memory, right? Like giving me a little bit of an overview of the topic, much more so. If my question was, I wonder what moms in Arizona think about mental toughness, then I would go and find a Facebook group with Arizona moms and I would sort of look for terms there and see what they think. And that would be just a
Sure.
very different task. So I think maybe the question there is like, well, what is the task? Or the question I very often ask my clients is when they say, well, Kate, should I start running? I don't know. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to run
Yeah.
faster? You should absolutely start running then. Like there isn't really any other way to get there. You want to run a marathon? Yes, you should absolutely start running. But if they say, well, like, no, I want to maybe get into powerlifting, then you should not get into running. Like, so,
Right.
but we can't really answer that question without, well, what are you trying to do?
Totally.
Mm.
So Matt, what do you think you're trying to do when you're on Twitter?
Yeah, you're blowing my mind right now because it seems so obvious after you say it, and I'm like, oh, of course that's true. Like, of course, everything I've never related so hard to what you just said. But yeah, I think that that's absolutely. I think it's remembering the intention, but I think I feel like it's something that begins as a mindless activity that just happens to, again, I fall into that thing where it's initially like, oh, I'm getting on Twitter. Usually it is more a mindless behavior. Honestly, I'm just seeing what's going on with certain things, right? And then I just happen to stumble into this comment section, and then, like I said, then it goes from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, and I can see how curating that makes a lot of sense.
Well,
Yeah,
because I
I
think
don't.
the danger with that, because we all do that, but the danger with that is that sort of behavior, that sort of activity, it becomes sand, right? You
Hmm.
remember like the metaphor, right, of the jar and the big rocks, and how the big rocks have to go in first, and then we fill the rest with sand. But if the big rocks don't go in, the scrolling, the Twittering, the Facebook groups, like at least for me, um,
Hmm.
can like it is sand, and I can so easily fill the whole freaking jar with that sand. And it's like, oh well, shit, it's been like 2.5 hours, so there's time for my workout. Come and gone, right? And now it's 5 o'clock, and I have to go get my kids from daycare, and another day's gone, right? So I think like, that's the piece where, like, what are the big rocks?
Yeah.
Because that stuff is sand, and it just so easy. Like there's infinite amount of sand. Keep scrolling. The feed never ends.
Right.
Like
Mm.
it's
There's
just
always something new. You
always
can refresh it and it's always
that's
new. I think the intention piece is really fascinating because it seems one, it's very challenging, I think, for many people, including myself, to be in that perspective because there's many forces. It seems to me that are actively fighting against that in the sense that I think the platforms and the social media companies, they don't want you to be intentional about your use. And so I think if you go in from the mindless perspective, it's very easy to and you're just a moldable mind in not having the intention, not knowing exactly what the task is. Like you said, it feels like it's the slope that you're gonna get pushed down without thinking will probably be a downhill one that is challenging versus a positive one. Just if you plucked, you know, 10,000 random people who don't think about how they use social media and analyze that, it would probably result in all of these things that you don't want to happen. You have more insecurities now because you're comparing yourself to other people, or maybe you have, I don't know exactly what it may be. But I think the intention piece is super, super important to that. And a
Well,
really
because
good
I think
takeaway.
it sort of, when we start trying to control on a compulsive behavior, it's often the wrong thing to control.
Mm,
I'm thinking of someone I worked with years ago, where alcohol consumption was an issue. And it became obvious that it was an issue. And we really, we talked about it, we worked through it, and it just didn't really seem like it was going anywhere. Like it was a bit of
mm,
a struggle because the person was really trying to address the thing. They were trying to address the drinking.
mm,
And then we changed directions. We started talking about, hey, what would be interesting? What would be cool? Is there something that you've always wanted to try? And this person, I'm talking about a woman in her 60s.
mm.
She said, I've always been curious about powerlifting. It just always sounded so badass. And she went out and she tried a powerlifting class. And she got into it. So she started training for a powerlifting meet. And fast forward a week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, drinking just started to fall away because
Mm,
drinking was sand and she just had this big rock now. She didn't have to control the drinking directly. It just happened naturally because Friday night would come by and she could have a glass of wine or two or three or four. But she had a meet early next morning, Saturday morning, like 9 o'clock. She had to be there pulling the barbell. And if anyone has ever tried to pull a barbell after 3 glasses of wine, it's just not a pleasant experience, right? So
sure.
it just fell away. And I think this is we
Yeah.
can use that
Yeah.
same, like, because to a certain extent, it doesn't matter how much time we spend on social media, as long as there is time for big rocks.
Mm,
And it becomes that same notion, like
mm.
we use that in nutrition coaching. Matt, I'm sure you use it all the time, where we use the principle of displacement. Like, how do I give up cookies? Don't give up cookies, but make sure that you always start with a protein
Mm.
and a vegetable. How many cookies are you going to eat after you've had a chicken breast and some broccoli? One? But if you just had cookies, you would have had seven.
Right.
Right? So you fit the big rocks, and the sand, the amount of sand in your jar just decreases by definition. So maybe we don't have
Mm,
to worry about that. We just have to worry about the big rocks.
yeah.
What's the starting point for someone to start figuring out? Because maybe they don't have that thing, right? Maybe they've gone throughout their life, they've gone from one thing to the next without a lot of self-awareness around this thing, and they've had maybe some reactivity to certain things that have happened in their life, or whatever. It's like, how, like, what questions do they maybe ask, or that maybe this older woman that you talked to her about, it's like, how do they start to figure out things that they that could be these big rocks?
I think everyone has some big rocks. Like everyone has anchors, whatever those anchors are, right? Like, so for some people, that anchor is, well, I have a job, right? Like, I remember talking to a friend, job 9 to 5. He would play video games 8 to 10 hours a day, which was very
Mm,
hard while working 8 hour job, but that's how it went, right? So he would drag his butt to the office for 9 o'clock. He would sort of make it through the day, 5 p.m., get home, eat something in front of a computer, and then play video games until 4 in the morning, right? Sleep for 4 hours and then rinse, repeat. So what are his big rocks in the moment? Well, he's always had the big rock of, I do need to be in the office for 9 a.m. And everything else was negotiable in the
mm,
moment, right? So, and I think everyone can sort of go back to that. Like, people talk about how their pets have pulled them out of the depths of depression because at the
mm.
worst of days, they needed to get their butt out of bed and actually feed the cat. right? Where, like I look at my day, like no matter what happens, like 5 o'clock, I need to go and get my kids from daycare. Like that's my anchor,
Right.
right? So like whatever needs to happen, it needs to happen by 5.
Hmm.
So I think like where do we begin? Like we begin there. Like in those non-negotiables, they can be very few and far in between, and they may involve zero self-care, but they're still there. It's like, okay, well maybe your jar just has the one big rock right now. So what are the big rocks that should be in here, but maybe are missing? What is the next big rock that you want to work on? Well, like maybe how about instead of sleeping 4 hours a night, we cut down the video games by 2 hours, and now you're sleeping 6 hours a night, right? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
I
it
love it.
it's such a good way to reframe perspectives around those things, because I thinking about your client who loved wine, it wasn't the wine, to your point, I'm just reiterating, but the wine wasn't the problem. It was that there was no rock there to work the wine around. So the wine became the rock, which then took away from all of her other pieces of her life. And so if she, and she ended up favoring or prioritizing powerlifting over wine. So she can still fit wine in, hypothetically, if it doesn't impact this other rock in her
that's right.
life. This person can still play the video games. If they sleep well and they're still in the office at 9 a.m., then how you fill the sand that fills in the rocks, it becomes less irrelevant. I think that's such a powerful perspective, because it's very challenging, I think, to tackle. Okay, I don't, I want to stop drinking, so just stop. That's there's so many mental barriers to do that, and so challenging to do. But if the perspective is more around, you know, what could I add to my life to help me prioritize drinking less, or what's missing, what void am I trying to fill with this alcohol, and is there any other tools that I can use or pieces that I can introduce to my life to fill that void, to just naturally make me not want it as much. It's such a powerful reframe.
Hmm.
Well, and I think like, our mutual friend John Goodman would say that personal trainers, they don't compete with other personal trainers, they compete with
Right.
Netflix. And that's kind of like that issue around the sand, because it is such low barrier to entry. It's in your
Right.
pocket, it's always there, right? Like, because I remember thinking about that in the very early days of both of my children's lives.
Mm,
Kind of breastfeeding through the night, like in the middle of the night. It's 2 in the morning, right? It's 3 in the morning, and you're like mindlessly scrolling on the phone with this baby attached to your boob. And every single sleep hygiene article would tell you, oh, like in the middle of the night, low light, don't expose yourself to blue. And it's like, have you ever breastfed in the middle of the night? Because it is very much not comfortable holding a full-size book while I'm holding a baby on my boob, while holding a phone in one hand and scrolling is actually quite doable.
Hmm.
right.
Right. So it's also like what is realistic within the moment. Right. Like that's at that point, you're there, you're bored, you're tired, it's kind of ongoing, and it is a
Yeah.
very low entry to barrier. It's like, well, what would be better for me is going outside for a walk right now. It's like, that's
Right.
great. It's 2 in the morning. Like,
And
I kinda
it's well, and that was your rock. And there, I love how you tied so many things into that, because there was a risk assessment, I assume, during that moment, maybe subconsciously there's a self-awareness moment in that moment. The rock was the baby. And again, I just love that perspective, because I think it's harmful to feel bad for, I should be taking a walk right now, but I'm not. I'm going to be on my phone. I feel like shit about that. That's not a helpful perspective, in my opinion, to have. It's and it's easier to not get to that point, I think, when you implement some of the perspectives that you shared of, can we bump the risk a little bit, and just accept it if there's this trade-off that we think is valuable. Like, yeah, would it be better if I read a book right now? Yes, let's accept that, but let's use that acceptance to fuel an acceptance of doing the thing that isn't as ideal, because it has these other benefits in our lives.
Well, yeah, and I think that's kind of the point. Like, would it be better if I read a book right now? Maybe, but better in what
In what
sense?
way, right?
Right? Like, what is it that would be better? better maybe for my mind, but also it would be less convenient. It
Mm,
would be more painful, like physically, because it's not convenient. Like, so it's just, we also have to start asking, like, what is the definition
Mm.
of good? Like,
mm,
good for what? In order to what? Like, what are you trying to do? So this is again like the question that often comes up, because we often kind of get sucked in these conversations, like what is the best pair of running shoes? Like what is
mm.
the best protein shake powder? It's like, I don't, like, for what? Like, how are you? And this is often the question that
Yeah.
I ask, like when I see those conversations, because it goes something like this, and it loops back to, I think, our conversation on how do we know the things we know and how do we evaluate information. So when somebody says, hey guys, what is the best protein powder? It's not really a good question, first of all. But fine. Invariably, you're going to get 300 responses to that question. And my question is always the same. Hi, original poster. Now that you've received 300 recommendations, I'm curious as to what your next step is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also known as now the fuck what? Like,
Right.
Yeah.
what are you doing with the 300 recommendations? And maybe a nicer way of asking
Right.
that would be, now that you have these recommendations, how are you going to go about figuring out which one is the best? Because you've asked for best
Mhm.
protein powder. What would be really
Right.
good if you had 300 people come back and they all gave you the exact same protein powder? Wouldn't that be amazing? Because then we would actually have some hope in hell that we this is the truth. 300 people came and they all gave me the same answer. That's amazing. But that never happens. So instead you just have three different interpretation of what best is, and you're exactly where you
Mm.
started. You're like, now what?
Mm. Right.
Or more confused potentially.
You're just more confused. Yeah, right.
Right. Right. Well, Kate, we definitely want to be respectful of your time. I think we are coming up on about an hour here. Alex, anything else? Any other final questions before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I did have one, if you don't mind, Kate, one final question for you. Well, first of all, something Jen, just a takeaway to there's so many gems that you've been planting that I am just gonna take with me, and so I want to share those. And one of those really key ones is especially thinking about interpersonal relationships and communication and interpersonal strength in general. It must start with yourself, and fill your own bucket before you try to fill other people's bucket has been a theme throughout this conversation that I think is really powerful. Again, something that I'm personally also working on as well. I think it's in order to be the best for other people, you kind of have to put yourself first and ensure that, you can't fill a bucket with an empty bucket. And so I think a lot of times that perspective is viewed as selfish, of I just want to focus on me. And obviously there's a huge spectrum of this, and there's a lot of generalizations here. But I think in general, putting yourself, emotionally regulating yourself, ensuring that your personal rocks are in place before you try to be a rock for someone else, or even just be your best person within your relationships. You have to be sure that you're your best self in your relationship with yourself. um,
Hmm.
One, would you agree with that takeaway that I've had from hearing you talk?
It's interesting because you'll probably never hear me use that expression. The
Mm,
one that we often use. What is it? The put on your own oxygen mask first.
mm,
Um,
sure.
and I heard somebody articulate that so well recently, and I'm trying to remember who, and I can't now. But the caveat that I would make, like I think the really important distinction here is that um, you're you need to fill your own cup, period. That's it.
Sure.
That's the end of the sentence. There's a period at the end of that sentence. So other people don't
Mm,
need to come in. There is no conditionality on like, oh, you need to take care of yourself before you can take care of others. That is such a
mm,
common narrative, and that is especially so in helping professions, for women, for mothers, for wives, right? Like for partners, there is that, the empath, like you need to be the best self in order to nothing.
Sure.
Just for
Mm,
you, like it's okay. Like we can just stay here with the one person, regardless of all the other people you can selflessly Gandhi, right? Like once you fill your own cup. I just used Gandhi as a verb. I think I might need to do that again.
Great.
So
perfect.
Alex, I'm
Everything you
with
just
you.
said is discredited because of that. No.
That's right.
No, that's an amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a perfect button. It's a perfect button, honestly. I feel like to wrap this up. I think that yeah, that's perfect. The sentence ends right there after filling up your own cup. I think that's super beautiful. Okay, to wrap this up, Kate, where can people find out more about you, get in contact with you, see your stuff? Take it away.
So most of my stuff lives on my website. It's my lastname.com. So just Google my name from the title of the show, because no one has any hope in hell of actually remembering the spelling. But it is solovyova.com. And you can find 600 plus of essays that I've written over the years there on behavioral change, on coaching, on nutrition, on travel, on endurance sports, all that fun stuff.
Love it. Love it.
Awesome.
Alex, any other
Boy, I've
any
read
other
many of them.
there you go. Go
I was
ahead.
just gonna say in the month lead or a few weeks leading up to this podcast, I read many of them, and they're an extension of the mind that we saw and showcase on this show. So would personally vouch for it as well. Yeah, I have nothing else. It was a real pleasure, Kate. Thank you so much again for chatting with us.
Yeah, thank you, Kate.
For having me.
Beautiful.